Welcome to Keeping the World Company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we're going to talk about Trump's wrecking ball and how it is affecting global relations. These effects are changing the liberal world order. Our co-host for the show is Tim Apicella. Our esteemed guests for the show are Gene Rosenfeld, independent scholar, and Manfred Henningsen, emeritus professor, political philosophy, UH Manoa. Welcome to you all. Thanks for being here. So Trump's use of the media and his search for media attention is not only domestic. Now in his second term, he has expanded it to global proportions. And we need to follow the global effects of what he is doing here at home so we can better understand his motivations and his effect abroad. So let me ask some questions here. Let's start with you, Manfred. Manfred, what do the Europeans think about Trump's machinations? What do they think about what he's been doing, the distraction he's been setting up about Gaza and the Riviera of the Mediterranean?
What I have seen so far is total rejection, combined with some kind of ridicule. There's a satirical dimension to Trump. I mean, he has gained some kind of clownesque image in the European press. They don't believe what they see and hear, even though they know that's what is happening. So in a way, they are waiting, for some kind of public response in the United States, and they are waiting for the American opposition to show its face. So far, the lame responses from Schumer and others are simply as surprising as the performance of the president himself. I mean, yesterday's news conference was a culmination of all of this reading of the American political scene today. And it's absolutely, the world is stunned. If it's not afraid, in certain parts of the world, people have become afraid, in the Middle East as well as in certain parts of South America, apart from, Canada, who got a grace period of 30 days. But overall, America's image is that of a bully. And all of what American soft power has accomplished, over the decades, is in the process of becoming destroyed.
You say that they're waiting, but we had a discussion of that on American Issues Take One not too long ago. And the consensus, and I'd like to ask Tim about this, the consensus seemed to be a pessimistic consensus that the Democrats and the people who might push back against Trump is not emerging and will not emerge. Can you summarize the discussion and give us your thoughts about that, Tim?
Well, I think what we discussed was that we'll see protests, but the only thing that really is going to be effective, at least for the short term, are injunctions by judges that through the legal system, some of this madness has to be put in check. But we all know that because of a flurry, or I call it a tsunami of executive orders, the court systems will be tied up. And by the way, that was planned. It was planned to tie up the court systems so that he can continue to put in these ridiculous executive orders and make these ridiculous proclamations while he's visiting, foreign countries or or threaten our neighbors, our friends and neighbors. So, even if there's an injunction, there's no saying that Donald Trump will actually follow the judge's orders. He's famous for trying to put that off or ignore it until he gets to the point of contempt. But we're in a real pickle here with trying to stop this either legally or, well, Congress is gone. There is no protest from Congress. They're in his pocket, and that's just the way it is. Even with the close margins, Donald Trump gets away with what he wants. And my proof for that is some of these nominees that he's installed are going to sail through and become permanent members of his cabinet. So that's where it stands.
Yeah. So, Gene, I have a hard question for you. Why is Trump doing all this? He's wrecking the country, wrecking the federal government is wrecking the country. He's got a wrecking ball swinging in every direction, including American, aid to overseas countries and organizations and individuals who have been receiving aid and care from the United States for decades and decades. He's wrecking that. I suggest to you that what he calls the pause may be a very long pause. And you can say that it's Elon Musk, but Trump is controlling Elon Musk. And the two of them are doing the wrecking ball overseas, too. So the question I put to you is why? What's in it for him? What is, his essential motivation here?
First of all, this has happened before. Not exactly the same, but it's the same pattern. We look for patterns in history. And when certain conditions obtain, external and internal, an opportunity arises for certain types of ideologies and movements to take hold. And this happens to be a time in which the ideology of fascism is taking hold. And we've observed this for decades, a couple of decades now, in Europe and throughout the world, and it has come home to roost. What Trump is doing now, he is in what Robert O. Paxton calls the second or third stage of fascism, which is to consolidate power, to take root. And it's all prefaced in Project 2025 and related to the ideology of that faction of the MAGA movement. And that faction of the MAGA movement wants to basically eradicate the government as we know it, except for security, internal and external security, military and police. Then all decisions will be centered in the leader. The leader is the central figure in fascism. And the leader organizes society from top to bottom with his cadres, the civil servants in place in our government are not loyal to Trump, so he has to replace them with loyal cadres. And they will not necessarily be fit cadres for these offices as we know it traditionally. This is a revolution, and it is a fascist coup. The razor's edge of superiority that the conservatives have in Congress doesn't mean anything because there are the conservative party in this type of rise to fascism will side with the leader. It will not side with the left. The leader and the left both have a common goal, which is to eradicate the left. They see it as weak and indecisive. So a good many of his followers and the hardcore followers he has is about, I would imagine, 34% of the entire electorate. They are in favor of what he is doing. And he's doing this according to ideologies and commitments that they have had for a long time. Maybe we haven't paid that much attention.
Do you think they're surprised in any way by the fact that he didn't really make the point when he was running for office? He was talking about groceries. And in fact, he said that I'm running on groceries. And when he won, he said, I ran on groceries. This is not groceries at all. This is way beyond that. And could you also distinguish for us the effect here in, the United States, which arguably could be a consolidation of power, but he's not limiting it to the United States at all. He's fighting with our allies. He's punishing our allies. He's messing around in international affairs. That was not part of his platform. The only thing I can remember about his platform is that he would stop the wars on day one. But he hasn't done that in Ukraine. He hasn't done anything in Ukraine except this transactional thing about if you give me your earth, your valuable special earth, I will give you weapons. Otherwise, not. It's a transaction like it was in 2017 with Zelensky, and Zelensky agreed. But, we didn't hear about this before. All we heard really primarily was about the groceries. Aren't those people in the United States who voted for him surprised?
There are some that are, and they are the ones that were attracted to his rhetoric. It's very, very important to distinguish between the message and the rhetoric of the leader and the goals and purposes of the movement, the leader in particular. Uh, Anything Trump says, you cannot credit as truth. And this is because fascism and a fascist charismatic leader will use any point of view and switch sides readily in order to achieve his objectives. You need a deeper analysis. Deep analysis is not what journalists do, it's what scholars do. And so a deep analysis of fascism shows a pattern that tells you where it's heading and what we can expect. And one thing you look at are the purposes and goals, and that is laid out in Project 25, in Schedule F, and in the general pattern, which is to concentrate power in the body of the leader, who then says he represents the will of all the people. And those people who are not in line with his goals and purposes are not the true people. And then you get a distinction between the true people and the ones that need to be sidelined or purged. And you basically cleanse the entire society until you achieve what you want to achieve. And that is unanimity of viewpoint and purpose. And anyone who works against that is simply a traitor. So you have an upside down society. You go from a democratic society to a leader oriented society. It's upside down. This is very organized, very understandable. But if you don't do a proper analysis and you focus on groceries and what he says from day to day, you will never be able to stand up to it because you don't understand what you're facing.
There are those that say that there's a traitor here, and it's him. He is a traitor to the Constitution, a traitor to the country, a traitor to the federal government, which is the country. Your thoughts?
Definitely. And what the Senate should be doing right now is impeaching the president.
Yes, but that's not going to happen. Can you give me a scenario where it could happen?
Yes. What's very important and what I learned from my most recent research from social psychology is that if you cave and you obey the authoritative leader, what I call the malignant authority, you will never be able to really oppose him because you will have given up your moral autonomy. If you oppose at the very beginning, and I'll take as an example Jamie Raskin, for example, who was instrumental in the January 6th hearings and also was present at the USAID protest recently. So, and somebody in the journalism field, such as Rachel Maddow, who's been studying fascism and making podcasts about it for a while, if you oppose from day one, you will retain your moral authority. Those individuals who band together and organize themselves to say no and to non-cooperate wherever they can and however they can. And I take as an example Indivisible, an existing opposition movement that works locally and has been swelling its numbers. And these are the ways in which you resist. And the sooner you resist, the more effective it is.
Well, that may be so theoretically, but let me go to Manfred. Manfred, there were people who protested and opposed Hitler and other autocrats in Europe back when. Does it work? It didn't work there. So what would you add to that, to what Gene was saying about how to handle a protest and the efficacy of the protest, and whether people in other countries which have been damaged, which are being damaged by what Trump is doing, whether they should protest, and if so, how?
Look, I'm not completely in agreement with Gene's grand design. I think it is too grand the way she described it. I don't think we have reached that point. I'm sorry to say that. I do not see the pattern being emerging in the United States. What I see is an apathy of or a failure of the Democratic opposition to speak up. I mean, when I look at Schumer's face, whenever he is asked a question, his eyeglasses run down on his nose and he tries to protect that. But otherwise, I mean, there's nothing coming out of this guy. And all of the other Democrats, I mean, what you have is the silence of the Democrats. I must say, I'm surprised by by our Senator Schatz and Hirono also, and by the governor. So what you have here in Hawaii, is a Democratic Party that is much more alive than the National Democratic Party. But that doesn't mean that the Democratic Party or the organizational structure of the Democratic Party is dead. I think Gene's design is too perfect to make sense at this point, at least, to understand the American problem.
Manfred, what would you have Schumer do? What would you have him say? What would you have the delegation from Hawaii do and say to be more effective in protesting what Trump is doing?
I would like for Schumer, for example, or other, not only Raskin, he is very good at that as well, and Schiff, but I would like them to come out and articulate what we are discussing here and what is discussed in all in other places, not only the United States but the world. And there is nothing but silence, and I do not understand the silence. And they have not been threatened. I mean, they are not living, in fear of stormtroopers or the SS or whatever. That's not there. So for that reason, this powerful state that was taken over by Hitler in 1933 is not controlled by Trump and his henchmen. So for that reason, I am sorry, but I am not completely in agreement with Gene's design that we have here fascism already operating in the United States, and the 2025 project is, so to speak, the blueprint for that. I do not buy that.
Okay, but let me ask you, let me be Schumer for a minute, okay? Schumer gets up and he says, Trump is a traitor to the United States. He is destroying the country. We must rise up. And that means all the Democrats must rise up. On Tuesday at 11, we want them all on the street. And we want the Republicans, if they have any moral clarity at all, to join us. We cannot afford to have the country being destroyed this way. How about that?
Yes, it's a very good idea. But I don't think he has the guts to do it.
I disagree.
Or the temper, whatever. I mean, he is a lame duck. No, not a duck. I mean, he is lame.
Gene?
Yes, I disagree. And Jamie Raskin gave voice to this a few days ago. If you have massive protest at this point, what will happen is there will be crackdowns and violence, and then there will be a confrontation. And violence is, protest movements that start peacefully. This is almost axiomatic in political science, and they grow and grow. Eventually, you get violent. You saw that in the Black Lives Matter protests after the various murders and attacks and extremism of the police, and it wound up with violent actors. So he doesn't want that, and he's right. I think what you need is something like an indivisible movement working locally and actively in all sectors of society. Because the one thing about fascism is that it doesn't just stay at the top, it affects everybody's life from top to bottom. It affects how you move, how you talk, your loyalties, how do you work, whether or not you accept science and truth, or you just toe the line. And the reason why it sounds like a grand design when I speak it is because I have read all of the detailed information of various cases over the last 20 or 30 years, particularly as it pertains to the United States. And what you extrapolate from that are the basic bones of something that is happening, so you understand it and you know how you have to confront and deal with it in a timely fashion, because blitzkrieg is exactly what you expect right now, this chaos of rapid executive orders to kind of obliterate everybody's attention and disorient people. You have to remain oriented. And in order to remain oriented, you have to understand what you're looking at. To understand that, you have to speak in very plain, blunt terms so that we're all on the same page.
Well, remember Tim Snyder had this one chapter on his book on tyranny, and he said something about sacrifice. You have to be ready to sacrifice your life, your honor, your fortune, what have you. And only in that way can this hypothetical group get together. But let me go to Tim, because we're not giving enough attention to the damage overseas. That is what's really in the core of this show. The damage, I think we can agree, is long term. What Trump has done to Canada and Mexico will not be forgotten. That weird deal with Colombia will not be forgotten. The people in Europe will never forget what has happened here, how he has abandoned them. And Ukraine must be seething at his lack of support. But, our reputation has been dashed overnight. And Marco Rubio, his acolyte, recently visited Panama in an attempt to get it back from the to get the canal back from the Panamanians. He has effectively destroyed U.S. aid. And I'm sure that Elon Musk would say they've saved a lot of money, but they've destroyed our franchise around the world. So my question, and this thing about doing genocide on the Palestinians in Gaza, moving them all out, that's genocide. And then talking about hotels, and you inevitably have to conclude that one or more of those hotels will be Trump's hotel. And taking ownership of Gaza and all, which is a really crazy distraction. But my question to you, Tim, is what is the nature of the reaction, the damage to our diplomatic relations, to the liberal world order, even in the past couple of weeks?
Well, I think you could probably draw a few parallels from history itself. And when Donald Trump first became first-term president, first thing right out of the gate is he installed Muslim bans visitation to the United States from certain countries. How alienating was that? Then he basically put all the NATO members on notice that they better start paying their dues, or else maybe the United States would withdraw from NATO. Then, if you remember, the visuals we saw, I think it was a G7 meeting where Donald Trump was in the back of the crowd, and where he's a couple rows back, and they're standing, and he elbowed his way in front of the leader of Moldavia and pushed him aside and puffed up his chest and adjusted his tie. So there was visuals about how the United States was going to exert its power. And we're no different. Well, it's much more severe right now, what we're seeing right now, but there was damage done then and there's damage being done now. Now, what was the difference? Joe Biden and his extraordinary diplomatic skills and his ability to basically consolidate and unify the EU countries together to say that, hey, the United States is back. But unfortunately, the response at that time was, yeah, but for how long? So the message is that the United States has not fully gone away from being a world leader. It's not gone yet, but if Trump keeps working on it, canceling foreign aid, making overt threats of military action in Panama or in Gaza, we will be alienated and we will probably no longer be welcomed as a member of NATO. So he's trying to dismantle our alliances, and this is what Putin loves to hear. This is music to Putin's ears, and who knows, possibly a plan of Putin's. I mean, we still don't know what the relationship is fully between Donald Trump and Putin, but it seems to be someone is following a playbook, and at this point, it seems to be somewhat effective.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about what kind of reaction will the rest of the world have when they see Trump's machinations in this way? And we've referred to it kind of on an oblique by saying that Europe, seeing that Trump will not support NATO, will not support the United Nations, will not support the EU. When we see that he will not support Taiwan either, it's clear. And so there's opportunistic motivations by both Putin and Xi Jinping. So what kind of reaction should we expect, and when should we expect it?
It's happening right now. I think Denmark is in front of the EU. Again, Denmark has been a long, steadfast ally of the United States. They have been more, in fact, during Afghanistan and Iraq, they sent troops in to support American troops in those wars. Denmark has been incredibly loyal to the United States. So right now, Denmark is speaking to the EU nations saying, hey, how far does this go as far as Trump's desires and not ruling out military action in Greenland? This is crazy. So he's creating, the response is that of caution and that of defense. And how far this goes determines by how serious the dead cat form of negotiation Donald Trump tries to employ. And I would say that people should not take it to the level of that threat. Call his bluff. He's a 4-year-old impetulant child, and start calling him out for it. And when he talks about not ruling out military action to defend the Gaza Strip, of which he does not own, or the United States does not own, it's time to call, pardon the French, bullshit. Call it out now. Don't wait. Say you're ridiculous. This is absurd. And if we have enough internal and external protest, be it verbal or on the streets, maybe he doesn't succeed as he thinks he will.
Yeah, let's look at the worst case analysis in terms of the opportunism that lies out there waiting to take advantage. What will Putin do as a consequence of the chaos that we are experiencing here domestically? What would Xi Jinping do in terms of the chaos that we are experiencing domestically? How do we stand to lose further because of that chaos and because of the opportunism that is clearly out there?
Look no further than social media to see it start to happen. And then also, you may see it from Donald Trump himself. Remember, in the 1960s, all the on-street protests, they were infiltrated by government intelligence services. The FBI embedded themselves in a lot of these protest group meetings. But not only embedded with the FBI or informants, remember, there were agitators that were just dispersed into those crowds became violent. And to Gene's point, that's what Donald Trump wants. He wants to see violence, and then he could use his authoritative powers to say, I'm going to evoke the Insurrection Act. That's his true thing that he wants, is to be able to have military at his disposal and keep them at his disposal under the threat of violence in the streets. So be careful about on the street protest, because we're playing into Donald Trump's hands. Now, if you're going to have a protest, spend the time and money to figure out how to spot agitators and get them out of the crowd immediately. Escort them out. Show them a swift kick of the foot to the rear end. Out. If you do that, you do not play into Donald Trump's hand.
Manfred, do you think that violence is going to be an element of our American history going forward? Is there any other way to get rid of Trump but violence, one way or the other? And of course, I go back to the point of sacrifice in Tim Snyder's book. Maybe we have to sacrifice. You know, in violence, people die. In violence, people lose their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor. Is it necessary to have violence? Is it likely to happen? And is there a way to avoid it and still get to the finish line?
I think we still have not reached that point where violence will become a solution. I mean, whatever you may, and what Gene especially may think about the American institutional framework, I still think it is intact. And not only in terms of the courts, even though some of the decisions may contradict each other, but also in terms of the legislative system. I mean, not only Congress, but the 50 states and their legislatures. Now, I do not think that when I said, you know, I'm lacking a voice that articulates the opposition to what Trump is doing now, and I look to the majority leader in the Senate, Schumer. It was the only name that came to me at this point. But I mean, it's the same with the House. There are people who are articulate. I don't think it has to become immediately violent, and I don't think Trump has to become defeated by a violent uprising. It may happen, you know, that violence occurs. The United States has always had, you know, these phases. But at this point, I'm still waiting for the political voice to take over from the bishop, the Episcopalian bishop of the Washington Cathedral. And that voice has not so far been heard.
But I want to go to the point of how the world is reacting. I think it's clear that the world is disappointed in the United States.
Yes.
They are shocked.
Yes.
They are very concerned about the liberal world order and its demise. And I think this is a long-term affair. And the question is, even if we come back in part, at somewhere along the line, however we get there, whether the world can put us on the hill again, as the city on the hill, can treat us as a global leader, or is that done?
It's almost done, but I in that sense, I agree with Gene, but it's not completely done. I mean, the United States is still hanging on there, but you have also this problem with the allies. You know, we talked about Trudeau's Canada. We talked about, well, we have to talk about the EU and its 27 member states. They are not as unified as one would hope, you know, at this point. And I'm still nervous about what happens in the election in 2 weeks in Germany. The AfD will not win, but the AfD will make it very, very difficult to get a coalition government together. Now, I think it will be, again, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, even though they are fighting each other now. The Greens could have become an alternative voice, but for some strange reason, they failed their own promise. So then you have the problem of France. You know, you have the emergence of Great Britain again on the European scene with Farmer. I find it quite remarkable that Trump, in a way, brings Great Britain back into the European unit. You know, because at all of these meetings that you have in Europe, political meetings, NATO or otherwise, you have the British Prime Minister being there. So in that sense, you could say one great success for Europe of the second Trump term is that he brought Great Britain back to Europe.
Indeed, he is bringing Europe, with certain exceptions, he is bringing Europe back together again.
Yes, that also.
And they
absolutely.
talk about organizing themselves to deal with him. Okay, let's go to final statements, if you don't mind. Gene, can you start? And can you tell us what is the level of damage that the U.S. has already experienced, and how it could recover in the eyes of the world?
We haven't experienced irreversible damage yet. Perceptually, it looks pretty bad. But in terms of carrying out, for example, there's been no real end to the wars in Gaza and Ukraine. Secondly, in order to see what's happening to the Pax Americana and the world order we put in place, the liberal world order we put in place after World War II with our alliances, we have to understand that for a couple of decades now, Vladimir Putin has been giving speeches and telegraphing exactly what his plan is. And his plan through the Valdai speeches is to wrest away from the United States hegemony over the world order in a liberal way, to get rid of its institutions, particularly NATO, to blast apart our alliances, to create a new consortium with China and Russia at the head, change the world currency, and to take over domination in the political and social sphere. They want to accomplish this ideally without a war. I think that would be very difficult. But unfortunately, the wrecking ball is helping them. And I don't think he does this because he is in cahoots with Putin so much as he wants to be the top strongman in the world. I mean, if you've got that much power, you might as well use it. And that's what he loves to do. And aligning himself with the richest men in the world helps him to do that. So we have to be very clear about what the intentions are and what they really mean, not what they say. So in this regard, the world can't go back to where it was. No. And in the interim of Joe Biden's interim presidency, all Trump's MAGA movement did was organize itself and prepare itself for what it's doing right now. And we should have been alive to that. That was predictable. It really was.
Yeah, that were tragic times. So I want to go to Manfred first, and then Tim for final comments here. Manfred, can you do you have any other thoughts that you didn't mention already that you want to leave with our audience for your final comments?
Well, let me say one thing. When I watched the news conference yesterday, I thought this is Trump's attempt of diversion. You know, he sees his internal problem has run into all kinds of trouble, and normally you declare war in order to divert, from these troubles. And I thought, his grand proposal there, creating a Riviera, a Gaza Riviera, was just that. It would take away, the attention from all of the problems that he is confronted with here in the United States. But there's one other. I mean, I mentioned that Europe has come closer together, and Trump is helping this process very, very well. That is a very great, you could say, a benefit of his performance in the United States. People see what may be coming their way. But there's one other little detail that I find disturbing, that it has not been talked about, and that is the phenomenon that two of the really big millionaires in the United States, Musk and Peter Thiel, grew up in apartheid South Africa, and all of the fascist gestures that Musk is showing again and again are a reflection of his upbringing, in a fascist apartheid environment in South Africa, where the Hitler greeting, was used within the right-wing movement long after the war. In the between 45 and 50s. So there is this guy, who grew up in this right-wing fascist milieu of racist South Africa, and that has, in fact, affected his thinking, his political thinking. And Peter Thiel also, even though he came only as a 10-year boy to with his father from Germany to South Africa. The father was somewhat connected to mining, but Peter Thiel picked up the same kind of mentality, this fascist mentality that you had in South Africa.
Very, very interesting. Thank you for that point, Manfred. That's really helpful. Tim, your thoughts to try to bring all these points together?
Just real quick to Manfred's point about Peter Thiel and his youth. Psychologists would argue that your formative years are from 1 to 6 years old. So whether he was 10 or not, probably just put the recipe in the cake. My thoughts are this. Getting back to Donald Trump, whether Donald Trump is following the Project 2025, Chapter F, or is Donald Trump just further devolving from a mental basis? He seems to be following a plan book, or a play, if you will, and but we'll see if it really is following a plan, or is he just further devolving? I would say that if it's going to come to him bantering European nations and taking task with them, all he's going to be successfully doing is pushing them to be trade partners with China. Because if he's going to install these tariffs, and if the tariffs take a foot, then they're going to have to, by definition, look for other sources for those products. And China will welcome with open arms. So beware, American farmers. Beware of manufacturers here in the United States, that maybe the guy you voted for will be your undoing in the end. Particularly if we start, if those nations start trading with China.
I want to add one other point. 9/11, we had terror on these shores. First time since anybody attacked us on these shores since the War of 1812. They came. They were successful in terrifying us and creating terror, which led to all kinds of other events. At the time of 9/11, the United States was the happy beneficiary of Article 5 of the NATO agreement, and other countries supported us in our time of need, of victimhood. So, number one point is that what Trump is doing is likely to evoke other such attacks. And when those attacks take place, will other countries, formerly our allies and friends, will they step up to defend us and support us and care about us? Not at all clear. So there's just another danger arising out of what he's doing today. I am not optimistic on that point either. Well, thank you very much, all of you. It's been a really interesting discussion. We've been talking about Trump's wrecking ball and how it is affecting global relations and the liberal world order with our esteemed guests, Gene Rosenfeld, independent scholar, and Manfred Henningsen, emeritus professor of political philosophy, UH Manoa. And thank you, of course, to our co-host, Tim Apicella. Thank you for being here. We'll see you again soon for the next show. Aloha.